All right. Welcome to Unfiltered. If you're enjoying these unfiltered videos, please press the like button. Please subscribe to this channel. Please leave a comment below. Tell me what you think about the videos, and please tell your friends. It helps this channel to grow, and for that I am truly grateful. Today I want to talk about the story of Joseph, which can be found in Genesis chapter 37. It starts at chapter 37 and goes all the way to the end of the book of Genesis. Now Jacob, who is also known as Israel, he had 12 sons. And of these 12 sons, one of them was named Joseph. Joseph was born to Jacob, or Israel, in his old age. And it says very clearly in the story that Jacob, he loved Joseph more than all the rest of his sons. And he treated Joseph differently than all the rest of his sons. And so Joseph's brothers were very jealous of this relationship that Joseph had with his father. Joseph, his father Jacob, made this really nice robe. And some call it the coat of many colors in certain versions of the Bible, but we don't really know exactly what it was, but it was a really nice robe, and it made him stand out. And everywhere he went, he would wear this robe, and it kind of displayed that Jacob loved him more than the rest of his brothers. And sometimes when Joseph was out interacting with his brothers, one day he told them, he said, "Look, I had this dream. And in this dream, there was these stalks of grain, and I had a stalk of grain, and y'all all had stalks of grain, and my stalk stood up real high, and all of y'all's bowed down to me." Then he also had another dream, and he said that the sun and the moon and the stars, 11 stars, they all bowed down to him, meaning not only his brothers bowed down to him, but even his mother and father. And he told his father, and he also told his brothers these dreams, and they began to be very upset with him. They began to hate him, the Bible says. They hated him because of his relationship with his dad, and they hated him because he had this cocky attitude. And he's telling them about these dreams where they're going to one day bow down to him as if he's going to be head over all of them. And they did not like him, and they hated him. His father was aware of this anger and aware of what was going on, and he was aware of the dreams. And one day, the 11 brothers, they were out tending the herd. They were out grazing. They were sending his dad's flocks out to graze. And Joseph was with his dad, and his dad asked him, he said, "Look, I want you to go and check on your brothers. They're out grazing the flocks in this certain field, and I want you to go check on them." And so Joseph goes out to check on them, and he can't find them at first. And then the guy says, "No, they're down this way." And so Joseph begins to make his way to where his brothers are grazing his father's flocks. And from a distance, they can see him coming. And they were so angry with him that when he was heading the way towards them, they had made up in their mind that they were going to kill him that day. And that they were going to put him in a cistern, one that was empty. And they were going to just tell their dad that, "Hey, a wild animal must have ferociously killed our brother." And so Reuben, one of the brothers, he does not want to kill Joseph. He doesn't think it's right. But he knows the rest of the brothers have decided to do so. And so they say, "No, look, let's just put him in this cistern." And later, Reuben was going to come rescue him out of that and take him back home. But all of a sudden, when they attack Joseph and they put him in this cistern, they see this band of people, this caravan of people that are fixing to go do some trading with Egypt. And it's the Ishmaelites. They had spices and various things that they're traveling down to Egypt to trade and to sell and to barter with. And so they have this idea, and they say, "Look, instead of killing him, what we're going to do is we're going to sell him to these Ishmaelites, and they can take him into Egypt to be sold as a slave." And so that is what they did. They pulled their brother out of the cistern. They sold him to these Ishmaelites, and the Ishmaelites, they went down to Egypt, and they sold him into slavery. Now what the brothers did to cover this up is they took the robe off of him, and they killed a goat or a cattle of some kind, and they used the blood of an animal, and they covered the robe with it, and then they brought it back to Jacob, their dad, and said, "Look, we found this." They lied. They said, "Look, we found this. We think maybe that he was attacked by a ferocious animal." And it said it grieved and it vexed Jacob terribly. And he said, "I will be grieving until the day I am in the grave and I get to see him again." And it overwhelmed him with grief, and it bothered him tremendously. So what happens is Joseph gets sold to the Ishmaelites, and they go down to Egypt. And they sell him as a slave to a man named Potiphar. Now Potiphar was one of the high guards He worked for the Pharaoh. He was the captain of the guards, and he was very well known and very well respected. And Joseph worked for him. And one thing that happened is, even though Joseph had been sold into slavery, and even though his brothers had done this terrible thing to him, while he was in slavery to Potiphar, everything he did worked out amazingly. God blessed him so that everything he touched prospered. And everything he put his mind to do, Potiphar noticed, everything I put this guy in charge of, it's blessed and it's highly favored. And so Potiphar started to put him in charge of everything because everything he did was so successful. He could tell that the gods had blessed him. And so Potiphar, he puts him in charge of his whole household. And the only thing he doesn't let him touch is his wife. But everything else he has control over. It says that Joseph was a handsome man. And so sometimes when Potiphar was gone, Potiphar's wife tried to urge Joseph to sleep with her. Please go to bed with me. She urged him again and again. And he would always say no and walk away. I just want to, as a side note, I just want you to understand, in stories of men that are offered sex from women, not very many of them say no and walk away repeatedly. This is a very rare occurrence in a very rare story. So Potiphar's wife continues to try to get him to go to bed with her, and he always says no. Then one day, while Potiphar's gone, she finds him in their house. And so she rushes over and grabs his cloak and says, please go to bed with me. And he runs off, leaving the cloak behind. Right before he runs off, he tells her this. Maybe in that time or the one right before, he tells her, he says, look, Potiphar, my master, has put me in charge of all of his household. The only thing I'm not allowed to touch is you. Why would I do such evil to my master and to God? Why would I break my integrity in such a way? And he tells her no, and she gets angry. And as he flees out of the house, she has his robe, and she tells everyone, the Hebrew slave tried to attack me. See, she didn't get her way. You know how wicked and evil people are. When they don't get their way, they twist and turn what you have done, even when it's good, to look good for them, for their own benefit. So she has his robe, and she says, when Potiphar comes back, she says, this Hebrew slave that you have put in charge of all of our house, he tried to attack me, and he tried to go to bed with me. And so Potiphar, when he hears this, he is furious, and he has Joseph put in prison. In the prison that Joseph is put in, that's the same prison that Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, has all of his prisoners in too. So he has favor with Potiphar, and then he gets accused of this thing that he did not do, and then he gets put in prison. Well, guess what? The favor of the Lord follows him even into prison. He is now wrongly, falsely accused of something, and now he's incarcerated. It says that the warden of the prison recognized this man here is blessed. And so even in prison, the warden puts him in charge of every inmate in prison because everything he did prospered. Everything his hands touched, it turned to gold. He noticed every single thing he did went well and it worked good. So he put him in charge of everything. Even though Joseph did not sleep with her, he was falsely accused and imprisoned. He was incarcerated for something he didn't do. His brothers hated him, so at first they wanted to kill him. Then they sell him into slavery. And if you notice, Joseph's life was amazing prior to this. He had this fancy robe, and he was his father's favorite, and everything he was doing was amazing. And then his brothers, they come up with this idea to attack him. They sell him into slavery. He has favor with Potiphar, gets accused of something he didn't do, is falsely accused, put in prison. But even while he was in prison, God gave him his favor continually, and he was prosperous in all he did, so the warden put him in charge of the whole prison. On one occasion, the cupbearer, the Pharaoh's cupbearer, and his baker, they get incarcerated for something. And while they're there, Joseph's interacting with them, and one day he notices that they have very sad faces. And he asks them, what's wrong? What's going on? And they both had various dreams that night, and the dreams disturbed them, and it bothered them. And Joseph said, look, God can interpret these dreams. Tell me what the dreams are, and I'll tell you what they mean. So the baker and the cupbearer, they tell him about these dreams. Joseph tells one, in a few days, you're going to go right back into service with the king. And he tells the other one, in a few days, the king is going to have you decapitated and you will be killed. And when they both get called back up to Pharaoh a few days later, that is exactly what happens. Now, when Joseph interprets these dreams, he says, it is not me who is interpreting these dreams. It is God. No matter what blessing may be on his life, he is always quick to give God the glory and to give God the credit. You know, some people, they've had a really rough life and then they start doing good and they don't give God the credit. They take it upon themselves like Nebuchadnezzar. This is what I have done. Look at what I have done. But Joseph didn't do that. He stayed humble. He walked in humility. He told Potiphar's wife, why should I do this evil against my master and against God? It would be wrong. He kept his integrity. And even though he was falsely accused, he continued to walk in integrity. And God blessed him, even in the darkest of circumstances. He asked the baker and the cupbearer, please remember me when you go back in Pharaoh's court, because I am falsely accused and I'm down here in this dungeon rotting away. A couple of years passed. They forgot about him altogether. And then something happens. The Pharaoh has a horrible dream. He has two different dreams, and these dreams disturb him tremendously. So he calls his magicians and other wise men of his courts, and he tells them, he says, look, you know, this is the dream that I had. And none of his wise men or his magicians were able to interpret the dream and tell Pharaoh what it meant. And one of the cupbearer, he said, wait a minute. I remember this guy years ago. And he tells Pharaoh, he said, you know, a few years ago, you were very angry with me and you put me in prison. And I met this Hebrew slave in prison. And he was able to interpret one of my dreams. And he said he interpreted my dream and the dream for the baker. And both of our dreams, exactly what Joseph said would happen, they both came to pass. And so immediately, years later, now Joseph, the Hebrew slave, he's now in front of the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And he said, look, I've heard that you're able to interpret dreams. And Joseph immediately interrupts and says, no, it is only God who can do this for you. And Pharaoh says, well, look, I'm going to tell you what my dream is. I had two of them. And I want you to interpret them because none of my magicians and none of my wise men, they can't interpret it. So the Pharaoh proceeds to tell Joseph these two dreams. And basically, to sum up the dreams, these dreams are about 7 years of abundance and 7 years of famine. And it was a prediction. It was prophetic. These dreams were God telling the Pharaoh what's about to happen. So Joseph, he interprets the dream because God gives him the interpretation. He makes it very clear that God is doing this. And then he begins to educate the Pharaoh. You're going to have 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine. And he said, so what God is telling you to do is you need to put somebody wise in charge of all of Egypt so that you can start setting aside some of the grain and some of the food that you're producing so that when you can save it up in storehouses, so when the famine comes, you have famine to last. And so after this, the Pharaoh is satisfied with the dream interpretation. And now he does something amazing. He puts a Hebrew slave in charge of everything in his kingdom in Egypt. And he says, the crown will be above you, but that is it. Whatever you tell my men to do, they will do. Whatever you tell them not to do. He put a nice robe on him. He put a gold ring. He put a necklace. He made him very high up. He was the number 2 guy in all of Egypt. The only person above him was the Pharaoh. Now, do you see how this story has now turned into something different? What looks as something horrible is happening in Joseph's life. Over a period of time, it turns into something so much better. And now, for all of those years of abundance, Joseph goes all over the land of Egypt and he starts storing things up from all the grain and all the fruit and all the produce and everything that they're growing and all of this food. He stores it up and he used to keep records of it, but he says he got so many. There was such abundance over these 7 years that he stopped keeping track. And then comes the famine. And the famine hits Egypt. And it hits all the surrounding counties, all the countries around him. And there was a severe famine and there was no grain and people were starving and people were dying. And so at some point, the Egyptians cry out to Pharaoh and said, look, we don't have any food. And he said, look, I have put Joseph in charge of all of Egypt. Go to him and he will sell you grain and he will sell you food so that you don't die. So Joseph, during these times of famine, he opens up the storehouses and he begins to sell grain and other food products to all of these people who are starving in this famine, who cannot produce food on their own. so that they do not die, but so that they live. And then all the surrounding countries, they find out that Egypt has food. And so Jacob, Joseph's father, and his brothers, they are also now in the land of Canaan. And they are suffering tremendously. And they hear a word that Egypt has food, that they have grain. And so Jacob sends his sons to go and ask for food from the Pharaoh. And so they travel to Egypt so that they may buy grain. They have some silver with them, and they want to barter and make trade so that they can eat and live and not die in this famine. And so Joseph is the one in charge for selling all the grain. He's the one in charge of all of that. And so when the brothers show up to Egypt, they are now put in front of Joseph. Not the Pharaoh, but Joseph. And then there's this moment where Joseph is standing there, and his brothers, they all bow down before him, just like his dream had said long ago. And they beg him for grain. And he begins to play these games with them, begins to treat them very harshly. He has a younger brother named Benjamin that also has the same mom as him. And he wants to know, where's Benjamin? He asks him all these questions, and he plays a trick on him. And he gets them to go back to their father, bring their brother down. And there's this series of games where he's kind of taking advantage of the moment. You can tell he's taking advantage of the fact that, look, these guys sold me into slavery, and look what now has happened in my life. So through a series of events, they go down and get the brother, and he reveals himself to his brothers after a period of time of playing tricks on them and speaking harshly to them and threatening to imprison them for the rest of their lives. He breaks loose and just says, look, I am Joseph. And then he tells them this: do not be distressed, because it wasn't you, but it was God who allowed y'all to do what you did to me. Because now that I was sold as a slave to Egypt, I have now become second in charge of all of Egypt. And now I'm able to give y'all the grain that you need during this time of famine. So eventually, over a period of time, Jacob, his father, and all of his family, they all come to live in Egypt. And he is able to rescue them from the famine. And you know, he had that dream where everyone would eventually at some point bow down to him. And all of that happened over time. Then Jacob, his father, dies. And when Jacob dies while they're living in Egypt, all of his brothers are now scared. And they're thinking, Joseph was not mean to us this whole time. He hasn't taken his revenge on us. But now that our dad is dying and dead, he might do so. So they went to him out of fear. And he says these amazing words. He tells them not to worry and do not be afraid. He says, look, what you intended for evil, God intended for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. He tells his brothers, look, what you intended for evil, God intended for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. While Joseph is standing in front of his brothers, he has this moment where everything comes around full circle and everything snaps into place. And he finally sees the reason why he had to go through all that he went through. Winston Churchill said the same thing when he was prime minister during World War II. He said, it's as if everything I've been through has brought me to this moment. And the good and the bad has prepared me for what I'm now doing. That's what kind of moment Joseph has. He has this moment where his brothers are bowing down before him, who he probably thought he would never see them again. But because he was in charge of Pharaoh's estate, and he was collecting and saving food during those 7 years of abundance, he was able to provide food not only for Egypt, but for the counties and countries around him. And everyone who was hit hard by the famine, they came to Egypt to buy grain. And he has this moment where all the stars align, where it snaps into place, and he sees, this is the reason God brought me through all of that. He tells them, what you intended for evil, God intended for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. He could have been vindictive. He could have sought revenge. He could have been angry. He could have handled it and played that card a lot differently, but he didn't. He could have slept with Potiphar's wife. He could have got angry and bitter and done nothing in prison. But every single place he went, God continued to bless him and give him favor so that everything he did prospered. And he continued to walk in integrity. He says, how dare, I couldn't do this to God. Potiphar's wife tries to sleep with him. And he says, no, I cannot do this to God. God's been too good to me. See, some people, they don't handle situations that way. They get angry, they get bitter, they play the victim. And they say, well, if this is the way it's going to be, I'm just going to do whatever. They start becoming the angry people that are around them. They start allowing circumstances to define who they are instead of finding their definition in God. Joseph remained a man of integrity throughout his whole process. And he was put as second in command, in charge of all of Egypt. And they end up, his whole family, his dad and all his brothers and all their kids and all their wives, they all come to live in Egypt, protecting them and allowing them to live during this severe famine. Maybe you don't know why things have happened the way they have in your life. And maybe you're anchored in this one bad moment and you're trying to understand everything that's going on, but you're not going to understand it till later. Joseph didn't know why he was falsely accused. He tells the cupbearer and the baker, please tell Pharaoh, because I'm stuck here in this dungeon for something I didn't even do. I was in prison many years for things that I did do. And this guy's in prison for stuff that he didn't even do. Sometimes life throws you these curveballs. It catches you off guard. Don't quit. Don't walk away from your integrity. Don't let go of God's hand. Continue serving him, worshiping him, trusting him, because he will give you understanding and clarity later. Joseph didn't know how all of it was going to work out, but he continued being a man of integrity. Continue walking down this road, even if it's uncomfortable. Joseph could have been angry and bitter, but he wasn't. And the first thing he tells his brothers is, don't be distressed. God allowed all of this to happen exactly the way he wanted it to happen. All those years in prison, I never would have chose that for myself. All the horrible things that have happened to me, I would have never chosen that. But it's made me into the man that I am today. And it's given me clarity and understanding. It's given me knowledge and wisdom in areas that I would have never known had I not been down the path that God chose for me exactly. The good and the bad have educated me and brought me to my right now. Joseph says, look, God orchestrated all of this. And you might be going through something in your own life where you don't really understand. Why did you keep relapsing so much? Why did this woman you thought you were in love with, why did she walk away? Why are your kids not speaking to you right now? Why did your kids get taken away from CPS? Why were you abused as a child? Why did you get abused as a child and also abused in your marriage? Why did all of these things happen? And you know what? God will turn your bad into good. He will work all things together for your good, even the bad things. But you got to stay focused. You got to stay faithful. And you got to trust him. When given an opportunity to do right or wrong, what is it that you choose? When given the opportunity to burn the midnight oil and help somebody out, even if it's inconvenient to you, what do? When given an opportunity to sleep with someone's wife, to steal money, to do all of these, we have all of these temptations, and you know it was a temptation. But even though things have been going very bad for Joseph during this time, he still said, no, you know what? I'm not going to do this. It would be wrong. How dare I sin against God in such a way? When everyone is around you, what are you doing? When no one is around, what are you doing? When you have these opportunities in front of you, are you maximizing them? Are you falling short? Have you become angry and bitter and chosen not to walk a path of life just because life's not turning out the way you want it to? People say, well, because it's going like this, then I'm going to take out my anger and frustration and all around me, all the people around me. Joseph had opportunities to quit, and he didn't. And then doors opened. Even though you might be going through hell right now, don't anchor yourself in this moment. Continue walking by faith. Continue blessing God. Continue being a light and love to those around you so that God can open up doors in the future that you don't even see right now. Joseph didn't see how it was all going to work out, but God worked it out tremendously and with absolute astonishment, incredibly. The way it all worked out. The T's were crossed. The I's were dotted. The dots were connected. And something that started off evil and to harm Joseph ended up being something that blessed his whole family. He told his brothers, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. God can turn something that is dead and raise it to life. He can have all your misery and pain from your childhood until now turn into joy and laughter. You can turn the pain that you've been going through all of your life into helping other people. You know, I've noticed this. Sometimes when people are suffering a loss, they grieve and they stay down and they never get back up. And then other people, they use that grief to help other people. Somebody might have lost a child in college prematurely or something. And then they start a fund in her name so they can bless other people. And then other people, they stay anchored in the moment and they never get over it. Decades later, they're still miserable. How do you handle the bad situations that you've been through? Are you turning it into something good? Are you letting it get worse and worse and become a nightmare? Joseph was faithful even when things weren't going his way. How do you handle when things are kind of falling apart? Do you stay faithful? Do you walk as a man or a woman of integrity? Are you sober right now until times get hard, and then you're going to quit and throw in the towel? Are you going to walk with God for a season and then run away from him? What are you going to do with these opportunities? Joseph stayed faithful, and God opened doors along the way. Even while he was in prison, even while he was a slave, God blessed him with favor so that everything he did prospered. Maybe your life has been a nightmare, a tornado all of these years. Stay faithful to God and watch him turn your nightmare into something amazing. What you intended for evil, God intended for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. I never would have saw my life where it is today. But God has opened up doors that no man can close. He has blessed me. I have joy. I have peace. And I am happy to be alive. I have hope for the future. I never had hope in my whole life. But now I see God's fingerprints on everything that I do. And I am so grateful. Thank y'all for being a part of my life. When you have an opportunity to get revenge, do you seek it or you turn the other cheek and let it go? Do you stir up strife with people around you? Or do you let it die off and become the more mature person in the argument? How are you handling these situations? Even when things do not go your way, do you continue to walk faithfully with God and being a man or a woman of integrity? The story of Joseph is found in chapter 37 of Genesis, and there's so much more into it that you can read. But it is so amazing that he sees everything come around full circle and so, oh my goodness, now it all makes sense. You will have a moment in the future where even the hard times will make sense. Now I see why I had to go through that so I could be where I am today. Stop living in guilt and shame. Forgive yourself and move on. Let God orchestrate everything so you can see how God turns that which is dead and raises it to life. Turns horrible situations into something that is amazing. Every day of my life, God is so amazing. I hope these words have encouraged you, and I hope the story of Joseph is encouraging to you as well. Have a wonderful night.